All right, my kids. Chapter 9, Moving On. Now, I think I told you there were 13, 13 chapters in here, so we have 4 left. Rowan woke, shivering. Well, I'll read the last part. Up and up they crawled to where the air smelled sweet and the sun shone, and there they fell to the ground at last and slept. Because remember, they're going through that really gnarly swamp where the mud came up to their necks. Rowan woke, shivering, and the sky was orange and red around the cloud-covered mountaintop, and the air was growing chill. John, Marley, and Ellen were still asleep, sprawled around him on the ground. All of them, even strong John, looked younger and more helpless like this. Their clothes, like Rowan's, were still damp and stinking from the swamp, and their hands and faces were streaked and filthy, and their hair was soaked and caked with mud. How different was this than the small company that had started out bravely this morning? So it's only been like one day still. And how differently did he feel about it and about his place in it? Rowan watched the 3 adults sleeping and wondered at the feeling of affection for them that had welled up in him. Before, though he had known them all well from his earliest childhood, he had been afraid of them, but now he trusted them, not just to look after him, but also almost to like him. He thought about this with surprise. Marley opened her eyes and blinked sleepily for a moment, and then she saw him watching her and smiled. She sat up and ran her fingers through her sticky hair. "We'd better wake the others," she said, "and light a fire. It seems to have decided that we will spend the night here." Later, the 4 of them sat around a blazing fire, feasting on toasted bread and melted cheese and sun-dried fruits and honey and oat cakes and Sola's best hard brown toffee. And it was dark now and cold, and the moon shone white in a star-filled sky behind a hazy veil of cloud. While they ate in the bright circle of light, Alan, Marley, and John talked of the village and told tales of times gone by and of things that made them laugh. They could have been sitting beside Jiller's hearth in Rin. Remember, hearth is like another name for like a large fireplace. They're usually made of stone. Rowan sat and listened to them as he did at home, and he wondered why things suddenly seemed so natural and relaxed. And then he realized it was because Brandon, Val, and Ellis were no longer with them, and Alan had let his guard down. He still chatted and joked as usual, but his mouth had no bitter twist on it, and he is often content simply to sit quietly, poking lazily at the fire. Rowan had heard Jiller say that when they were all children, she had decided that Alan's joking and play acting formed an armor stronger than Val and Ellis's iron muscles and Brandon's bad temper. And in a way, though Alan was grown up now, Rowan could see that the armor was still kept at the ready, and needed to be, since it was clear that for some villagers, like the 3 who had left them today, Alan would never be one of them. He would never quite be accepted, however much he wanted to be, and however hard he tried, because of his traveler father. Remember, his dad was one of those traveler guys. Rowan, watching Alan's lean brown face in the firelight, saw that in a way he was caught between 2 people. In his own eyes, at least, this knowledge kept him on guard, and here and now, with his friends that he trusted, he could truly be himself. Rowan listened as the others talked, feeling comforted by their presence, and no one mentioned Brandon, Val, or Ellis, and no one looked at the map as it lay spread out to dry by the fire, and no one talked about the swamp, or the spiders, or the trek still to come. Trek is another name for like a journey, like Star Trek. It's a star journey. But when the food had been put away, and they had woven Brandon's green-stemmed torch into torches for the following day, and the fire had burned down to glowing embers, the heavy darkness began to press in on them, and gradually they fell silent, and Rowan wriggled uncomfortably. They had dried their clothes as best they could and combed out their filthy hair, but they could not wash, and the water in their flasks had to be saved for drinking. Rowan had given much thought for a long hot bath, and his mother would smile at that, he thought. I usually complain about having baths, and at once a pang of loneliness stabbed through him. By now, Ellis and Brandon and Val would be nearly home. They would surely not let darkness stop them, and they'd stumble into Rin at a time when people were thinking of putting out their lamps and going to sleep. Anad would be sleeping already in the little room that she and Rowan shared, and Jiller would be sitting downstairs by the fire, reading, maybe mending something. Would she be thinking of him? What would she feel when she heard from the others? Alan glanced at his sad face. "The same moon is shining over Rin, you know," he murmured, pointing to the sky. "Think of that." "It's not worth packing this last piece of toffee, Rowan," said Marley, holding out the package. "You could finish it for us, I am sure." "The map should be dry by now. Do you not think so, Rowan?" asked John casually, almost at the exact same moment. Giant bumblebee. Go on. Go on. When I was walking in here, I almost stepped on a bull snake that was about almost as long as me. It was huge. It was the biggest bull snake I've ever seen. It was right in my yard. It was really cool to see it. But I literally almost stepped on it. It was just sunning there, right there in my garden. "The map should be dry by now, do you not think so, Rowan?" asked John casually, at almost the exact same moment. Rowan realized that all of them were trying to comfort him in their own way. He grinned shyly at Alun and took the toffee from Marley, and nodded at Strong John. "I will look at the map," he said. He brushed the dried mud from the parchment, and with his finger he traced their path and found the place where they were now camped. It seemed they had completed about a third of their journey. There you go, it's a fraction. From here, they must turn due west again, climbing until they reached what looked like a steep cliff. There, the red line rose abruptly, and Rowan's heart sank at the thought of another fearful climb. He looked at the third blank space on the map, and there it was, or where rather the spot had been, because he bent over the parchment and haltingly read the words that now showed in the dim firelight. "Look for the hand that points the way, and take the path where children play. Then where the face with breath that sighs bends to admire its gleaming eyes, your way is marked by lines of light, the means escape from endless night." "Children!" exclaimed Alan. "Are we to find people in this place? I mean, people, Marley, in hot tubs to wash in and soft beds, in bowls of soup?" "Perhaps," I'm sorry, hold on, kids. Sorry, thank you. They've been out for one night and they're already whining and crying about hot baths and warm food. Just stop it. "Perhaps," said Marley, "but do not forget that people can also mean weapons and fear of strangers. And they will be many, and we are few." Strong John looked up at the dark, silent mountain. "If there is a village so near, it is well hidden," he said. "Still, we shall see. Let us rest now. We will start at first light. We'd be well to be early visitors if visitors we are to be." Despite his tiredness, Rowan lay unsleeping for some time after all the good nights had been said. The others lay quiet, and John and Alan had rolled up like caterpillars in their blankets, and Marley was lying flat with hers flung over her shoulder. She'd be cold in the night, he thought. He himself was warm, and the fire was banked up and glowing, but the words of the map's verse ran around and around in his head, and always ended in the same way, in the same frightening way that jerked him awake and started the process all over again. Endless night, endless night, endless night. He woke with a heavy head to the sounds of Marley heaping earth onto the fire and Alun whistling. It was still quite dark, but the sky had lightened, and somewhere birds were singing. Rowan thought of Star and the other Bookshaw moving to the pool for their morning drink with Jiller and Anad, and he imagined their bewildered snuffling sounds as they found the water even lower than before. They'd be getting very thirsty now, and they would taste the brown muddy stuff that was left, and then they'd shake their heads and paw the ground, and they would wonder where he was. "We are going as fast as we can, Star." Rowan closed his eyes, and he thought the words as hard as he could, as if he could make his message reach his friend. "Soon they'll be at the top of the mountain. We will make the water flow again, soon." Then he remembered, and his eyes flew open again, filled with horror. Tomorrow, or the day after that, they would reach the top of the mountain. And the dragon. His heart lurched, and he felt sick. So much had happened. He had been so afraid on this journey that for a while he had actually forgotten his greatest fear. Until now. And then he thought of something else. Another day. Another day. Another day, another dawn. And the mountain was silent except for the birds, and the dragon had not roared. He was still considering this when they set off again, due west and climbing. Alan, he said timidly, do you think that the dragon could be dead or has gone to another place? I certainly hope so, replied Alan cheerfully. After thinking the matter over carefully, I have decided that I would prefer not to meet it. There was no sound from the mountaintop this morning, put in Marley. No, nor was there last night, agreed Strong John, and he glanced down at Rowan. Many do say, of course, that there is no dragon at the top of the mountain. No one's ever seen it, and we have no proof that the old stories about it are true. Brondon certainly did not believe it, said Marley. Instantly, the same thought entered everyone's mind. Brondon had not believed in anything that she had not seen with her own eyes, and Brondon had found that she had been very wrong. Very wrong. Strong John began to walk a little faster. He was carrying Rowan's backpack again, even though, without the extra weight, Rowan had to struggle to keep up. And after a while, he had no energy to think of anything but the steep way ahead of him, as perhaps John intended. They pushed through some ragged bushes clustered at the top of the rise. And then Alan exclaimed and Marley muttered under her breath, and Rowan looked up. Rising over the tops of the trees, directly ahead of them was a sheer cliff of red gold rock glistening in the first rays of the sun. He gasped for breath and stared at it, fascinated. And then he realized that he'd seen this place before many times, while tending the bookshop at sunrise, but then it had been small and far away. Then, gazing up the mountains, he had seen the massive green in the strip of this red gold, and then the cloud that hid the mountain's tip. But now the cloud rose right in front, or the cliff rose right in front of him, and he could see that it dropped from the cloud like a wall that was as smooth and as straight as the side of the mill of Rin. He could not climb it. He knew he could not. The very sight of it filled him with terror. He pressed his lips together so that he would not cry out, and despair welled up in him. It means he just was filled up from the inside out with despair, which means hopelessness. They had come so far and fought so hard only to be defeated by the mountain at last, for it was not only he who could not climb this cliff. The closer they came to it, the more they could see that no one could climb it. There were no footholds. There was nothing at all to cling on to that red gold stone. Not a plant, not a hole, not a sharp piece of rock. Nothing. We have a problem, Alan remarked. So it seems, Strong John said, and he scanned the cliff with narrowed eyes. We should not despair, said Marley, wiping the sweat from her forehead and shivering at the same time. The air was cold now, and the chill wind blew around them. The way may be clearer to us when we arrive at the spot. Alan and John looked grim as they began walking once more, and Rowan could see that they did not share Marley's hope. But when half an hour later they emerged from the trees and saw what lay at the foot of the cliff, they realized the wisdom of her words. A cave, said John, and he peered inside the dark opening that was like a door in the rock. A very deep one, too. Could it be? Rowan! They clustered around Rowan as he unrolled the map, and the red line was moving quite steeply. That was true, but not as steeply as the cliff rose to the clouds. Wonderful, said Alan, an easier way. And indoors, out of the weather, too. He turned to Marley. What a relief. She forced a smile. Indeed, she answered, but Rowan saw that her face had grown pale. They lit one of the torches they had made the night before, and it flared up, and then it settled into a slow and steady flame, and Marley led the way, holding the torch out stiffly as they stepped into the cave. Piercing shrieks greeted them, shrieks and the flapping of thousands of leathery wings as bats in their hundreds, disturbed from their daytime rest, fell from the roof of the cave and wheeled about, beating at their faces. Shouting, they bent their heads and crouched on the sandy floor, their arms protecting their eyes. Rowan could hear himself screaming with the others. It seemed an age before the high-pitched screeching had finally died down and the panic-stricken creatures had once again departed. Only then did Marley and Strong John and Alan and Rowan rise to their feet, breathing heavily as if they'd been running. They looked at one another, and then Alan grinned. Who is more frightened, do you think, we or the bats? Relieved laughter echoed off the stone walls, and the torch flickered, casting high shadows. Look! Cried Rowan. At the far end of the cave, by the side of a wide arch opening that seemed to lead yet into another chamber, stood a tall and oddly shaped rock. It was narrower at the bottom than at the top, and from it pointed a long narrow finger of stone. Look for the hand that points the way. Torch held high, they walked forward and through the archway deeper into the mountain. Chapter 10 is called The Endless Night. I'll read that one really soon.